are growing, growing high and higher. We 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 are growing, growing high and higher. There's a land that is fairer than day, and by faith we can see from afar. For our Father waits over the land to prepare a dwelling place. There's a land that is fairer than day, and by faith we can see from afar. For our Father waits over the land to prepare a dwelling place. There's a land that is fairer than day, and by faith we can see from afar. For our Father waits over the land to prepare a place. We are going home. Count the years as months, count the months as weeks, count the weeks as days. See, I go to count, see, I go for my God, for me. That's all I can go, my son, go see, I go now. I'm so sad, see, I'm never see,
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and we would like to apologize for being late, but we appreciate your patience. So welcome to yet another episode of Spotlight Conversations, where we go there where we know you want to go, but may not have the platform. Today, we're looking at a question that's been doing the rounds in the Christian community, especially over the last, I think, year, 2 years, or even 3 years. And it's been doing the rounds in the non-Christian community for a while. And the question is Jesus, and therefore is the Bible, and therefore is Christianity white, or has it just been whitewashed? So I'm sure you have some thoughts on this, or questions that you have. Please remember to send them through quite early so that we can get to them quite quickly. Otherwise, you may just miss the boat. As usual, I'm not alone. I have our resident pastor, Pastor Ngosi. Welcome.
Thank you.
And then we also have our guest today, Brother Ndumiso Sibanda, who has done a lot of research in this ground, so we are privileged to actually have him share with us. And I must say, he's in the process of writing a book. It's already in edit. So what you hear here has actually been put down on paper, and I would urge you to actually buy the book when it comes out. Welcome, Brother Ndumiso. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invite.
Mfundis, I'd like us to start here, right? Because you hear some people who then say, what does it matter whether he was white or yellow or red or pink? Jesus was Jesus. Why do we need to have this conversation? Does it really matter?
The excuse, whether he was white or not, is immaterial, is a black story. Whites matter. The color of things to whites really matter. Whites are not denialists. They will not deny who they are. Only blacks deny who they are. That's the beginning of the denial around the color of Jesus. Blacks move from epistemic vacuity, nothingness. They move into a Christianity that brings a white Jesus. And they think this is the universal model of Jesus Christ. And because he's white, therefore Jews were also white, because Jesus is, in terms of earthly birth, a Jew. Get the point? So, I don't have time to discuss with those who nullify our argument. I can't say they're lost. Let them stay in their track. We are in our own track. And we're not going to beg them, and we'll not hate them. They're comfortable there. But I'm uncomfortable in preaching to my kids, teaching to my generations in the African community, a false anthropology, a false ethnology, a false history. The name Adam, you go to the dictionary and elsewhere, means dark earth or black earth, Adama, where Adam came from. And in the Bible, things are often named after where they come from. So it is essential for us, particularly in a land where we're going through a serious crisis. It's a multiple crisis. Black people in South Africa are going through a multiple crisis. And I don't think many are sensing it, because they're going through hunger, they're going through unemployment, they're going through this COVID thing. They think these are just the issues. The issues are bigger and more complex than just a disease.
So, Mfundis, when you speak about denialists, are you speaking about blacks who are saying it's not an issue, or are you speaking about whites who are trying to not making it an issue? I'm
talking about both groups. I've been in a television program, where this thing was done. And the speaker authenticates the blackness of African people, their Africanness, in terms of where they origin and who they are biblically. And whites just wrote insults to him. Blacks said, wow, finally we have arrived at home. You get the point? So I think this whole question of the complexion of Jesus is a cosmic issue. We need to raise it as high as we can, because it is the center of our destruction by European people.
Dumiso, let me bring it in here. When did Jesus become white?
When history became white. So you are talking of issues of representation. So how is history represented? You have a conqueror and you have the conquered. So for you to maintain that line of thought, you as the conqueror must also conquer history, so that those that you have conquered would remain conquered. So you can't tell me that you have beaten me now, but your forefather once beat me. So I will gain strength to fight against you based on the knowledge that my forefathers once defeated you. But then if you show me a history that says all your forefathers were defeated, then it means there is no need for you to rise up now, because just like them, you will be defeated. So when you come now to the Jesus story becomes the biggest story for the past 2,000 years. So whoever owns his race is the biggest. He's probably the most popular name. Between him and Allah, I think Jesus is number one. He's probably the biggest name on earth. Whether you believe or you don't believe, either way you will find his name. So whoever owns that name becomes the champion. So all races, let me say all, but the interested ones would want them to be representing their culture, so that you draw strength from that to say, at the end of the day, even Jesus is on our side. not by side of faith, but is on our side in terms of color. So this is why there is a need for us to then talk about who is this Jesus. I like what Mfundisi is saying, that history, that anthropological history is important. You have a guy who says he comes from heaven, and he says he's making a promise that is going to take us there. But this guy has no race. Currently, we haven't agreed what race he is. So would you believe his story? Would you let go of your things that you wanted to do? Because a guy who is raceless, he lived somewhere in Jerusalem, but no one knows what race he was, but he's saying one day we're going to go to heaven. Would you believe the story of heaven, or would you believe a story of a man who has no race? Why are you so strong on your Christianity if you don't even know what race he was? You are interested in his gender. If I said Jesus was female, you would kill me. Because as a man, I am interested in the fact that he is male. It gives me, there's a psychological advantage that I have by him being male. So if I were to say Jesus is female, what does it do to you as a female? Mm-hmm. So that interest is also an interest in racial wars. To say, if I say he is my race, not your race, so why did God come down from heaven and choose my race and not yours? So even if I speak equality, at the end of the day, you still have to address Jesus in my race. I am the relative, the closest one. You are not. So that's you might think it's just about Jesus, but you are questioning world history when you question Jesus. You are questioning everything that humanity is about when you question Jesus. So he is just the focal point that makes it easy for us to discuss. But what you are asking actually the whole Bible. What's going on with the whole Bible? So it's not only answering Jesus, because whatever attempt that you do there, you affect the whole theology that has been set.
I think he was female. Have you seen those dresses he wore? Anyway, Fundis, when we say white, what are we referring to?
We're referring to a category of thought designed by white people who called us black. We never called ourselves black. We called ourselves Alkebulians, Africans. We called ourselves after our nationalities, after our families, and so on. There was no African who went around boasting about blackness. You can't boast about whiteness in a universe of whiteness. What's unique about you? You can't boast about blackness in a universe of blackness, which is why the issue of race did not comprise part of our discourses before 1652. The issue of race became critical when another people, differently colored, started ill-treating us, primarily on the basis of color. And assuming that this color is the garage in which rests every other thing that is inferior and destructible.
And in fact, when you look at the history of the term race did not exist until the 1500s.
Yes.
And even then, it referred to a group. So it could be a family group.
Yes.
It could be people are based there. It was not about colorism per se. And it says that the race in relation to now, your color, your physical features, your genetics, and all of that became prominent during the time of colonization and during the time of slavery, because they needed to be able to distinguish between the slaves and the non-slaves, and this was the easiest way. And then it was cemented during the Enlightenment phase. Anyway,
could I also add something to what you said?
Yeah.
Also to validate what they were going to be doing to those who were darker than they.
Yeah, it's used to assuage your conscience.
Yes.
So if I am the mastermind of this, you actually don't understand why I'm saying black people are less than white, because you don't understand that ultimately I want the gold that they sit on. So for me to get the gold, I need to convince you, because you're going to be my soldiers. I need to convince you that what you are going against is not human beings. You're going against animals. So what methods must I have for me to convince you that those are non-human, so that when you go to take the diamond or the gold, you're not taking it from humans. Because if I, the mastermind, are defining them as humans, then you would question yourself to say, but they are just the same as I am. Why would I do that? So the first things that you need to do, racial war was first won with the white community. You needed to convince the white community that blacks are not human, so that white people can propagate this idea to say blacks are not human. So when you talk race issues, you are not only affecting blacks only, you are also affecting the thought that white people have. A white man with nothing looks at you as nothing in a BMW. When he's walking next to you, at the end of the day, he says, I am superior than you, because of that thought that you can drive the BMW. It's just like me teaching a monkey to ride a bicycle. That doesn't mean a monkey is now a boy because it's riding that's how they view. So it makes it easy then when you go into war or when you go into taking land. It makes me sit comfortably in Sandton, knowing that you are squashed up with your family across the road in Alex. It's easier because you have created in me the thought that the one that is in Alex is not as human as I am. In as much as you're human, but you are not as human as I am.
So we because we're talking about this again within a Christian context, and are we then saying this raceless for now Christ is not reaching the white people who are claiming him? Because I mean, if that's their thought, then that's already it's not biblical. It's not what Christ actually represents. So are we saying that this Christ that we were both claiming and fighting over is not actually reaching them?
You're talking about whites.
Yes.
You see, the story is bigger than what we're discussing here. And I want to follow in his track. They have to thingify your raciality, your humanity, so that they are justified in treating you like a non-human. You happen to have been born, happen to have been around, but you are subservient to us who are of a higher quality of life. We are the humans, you are the subhuman. Therefore, we are morally justified in ill-treating you because you don't have a conscience in the first place. You are not a candidate for salvation. Do you get the point? And it's unfortunate that this thing is so subliminally rooted, even in Christian theology and Christian movements, including the Adventist faith, that we are not going to remove whites from whiteness, and so that they can accept equality. You see, white can't be equal blackness. Blackness is the presence of all color. Whiteness is the absence of color. So there's no equality there. There's you can't take 10 and make him equal to 0. Whites who know what science is know that whiteness represents absence of color. When you remove all colors, white remains. But that does not mean it's a negative reality. But when you combine all colors, the answer is black. The product is black. Why did God start with soil and a dark-skinned Adam? Because in him, all humanity rested in terms of color and genetics. Okay. God could not have started with a white man because he would not have started with absence. He should start with presence.
Okay, so we've established that race, denoting people in terms of race, it's not a biological imperative, it's a social construct.
Yes.
Right? Which came up because it made sense for people, and we've established the fact that, okay, so we're strongly saying he is not white as in European, blonde hair, blue-eyed, right? Let's bring it down now to first century Palestine, which is where Jesus was born. Can we describe the people then? First century people in Palestine where he was born, because we're now trying to get closer to then what he may have looked like, right?
Okay, when you get there, then it means now we need to go back to history. And at that particular point, you need to define Kemet.
Yes.
all the surrounding areas at that particular point were defined by Kemet. I'm deliberately using Kemet instead of Egypt,
Yes.
so that you don't in your mind assume the Arabic Egypt, because the problem is assuming an Arabic Egypt, then it makes you think of an Arabic Palestine. Because remember, Acts chapter 21 verses 38, the Roman soldier says to Paul, "Are you not the Egyptian
Yes.
that was causing a strike?" So you see, to the Roman soldier, Paul is an Egyptian before conversation. So when Paul walks in, he says, "My guy, I arrested you a few days ago. You caused a riot of 4,000 men that you led them into the wilderness. Are you not the same guy?" Paul says, "The guy I am, but I'm not Egyptian." So this is a white man looking at a Hebrew boy, and he says, "Are you not Egyptian?" And this is why now God, when he wanted to hide Jesus, he takes him to Egypt. He does not take him further east, neither does it take him to the west, but it takes him down south to Egypt, so that he hides. He's hiding from Pharaoh. So you do not take a white boy and go and put him in Alex to hide from a black guy who is running after him. So what Moyo Zedong, the Chinese guy, he says, we need to teach our people guerrilla warfare. Let our soldiers hide in the masses. So Christ needed to hide in the masses so that he grows as if he is one of them. And Egypt has always been a point of reference and a point of refuge for Israel. From Abraham to Jacob to Moses and now to Jesus. So it has always been that central point. So if you identify Egypt, you have identified Israel. If you identify Egypt, you have identified Jesus. So once you know the race of the people that are in Egypt, you know the race of Christ. And this is why in all this discussion, the focal point, in as much as we're talking about Jesus, but politically the question is, what race built the pyramids? If you find that race, then everything begins to fall in place, because this is the race that gives modern society science. It gives engineering, it gives agriculture, it gives architecture, it gives music, it gives poetry, it gives the soul of the earth comes from Egypt. Philosophy comes from Egypt. So if you know who the Egyptians are, then the question of Jesus becomes a non-issue, because you finally know what's going on.
But are you saying that, and same applies to Moses, who grew up, as in the palace? Are you saying the only reason that was possible is because they looked alike? Could it not be possible that he could hide in Egypt because the Egyptians were not going to sell him out? The Egyptians were not chasing him. So it was just safer because it was away from Herod, who was trying to kill him, rather than it was to one of his own.
Have you noticed that there are variations of blackness, but there are no variations of whiteness? Because blackness is the presence of all color. Fundamentally, I'm giving you a scientific fact. It has nothing to do with romance around blackness. When you mix all colors, black, so that the black race becomes the mother of all racial groups in terms of pigmentation.
Look, true.
Which is why God locates the Garden of Eden within that Afro-East, what we call Middle Eastern region. Yeah, since 1916. But all that was regarded as Africa.
Yes. But my question still stands. Are we saying the affiliation, the ease with which they could hide in Egypt is because they looked alike?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying? And
Yeah.
I'm saying, could it not be possible that it was just easier to hide, to
No,
run to
not
Egypt?
No, it was easy to hide the ANC comrades in Zambia and Zimbabwe and the neighboring countries. Why was it easier? Because they could assimilate.
Yes.
Herod was not looking for Jesus for fun. Jesus at his birth, the wise men came and said, finally a king has been born
Among us.
Now imagine announcing in KZN in the reign of Ushaka, and then you say, finally a king Gazulu has been born and Shaka is sitting there. And you say, okay, where do I hide? Do I take this child who is white and go and hide him in Lesotho? Just close to KZN, and Shaka gets to know that there is a white boy, even if you did not say it's Jesus, there is a white boy running around in Lesotho. Do you think Lesotho was going to be safe? So Herod had power, the power that he shared with the Romans. The Romans were in support of Herod. So Egypt politically would have not housed a boy that was going to cause problems for the Egyptians because of the Romans. So he needed a way of hiding him in that community so that he looks like an ordinary boy. Remember, even when he walked in Jerusalem, they said, it's just the son of a carpenter. That's how camouflaged he was. Everywhere where he walked, Isaiah says, he would not bring glory. When he walks into the room, only, even his disciples, finally when he's about to die, he asked them, Jen, so who do you say I am? When Peter finally said, you are the son of God, says, that was not revealed to you by man. So it's not like you are viewing Jesus now. When you are viewing Jesus now, you have watched a series and you know the conclusion. So they asked you initially, so who killed this guy? I know the detective shows, you like watching them. And they go through the story, but when you start off from when they tell you that the person that killed this guy is the sister. And all along when this whole story is being told, the sister is here and no one knows. So Jesus is like that. When he walked just like any other child. No one knew who he was. Even when he landed in Egypt, no one knew. Because remember, he comes, he's a poor boy, he's with the masses are moving, he's also there. So the camouflage was very important for him to survive. One time, someone identified him and they wanted to stone him, you remember? When he was in the crowd and they asked, and then he blatantly said, Abraham that you speak of, I am greater than him. The crowd was like, no, that's blasphemy. So his life, God wanted his life not to be blasphemous in that he will be easily identified as the Son of God. So he needed to hide in the majority. So for him to easily hide, if he was any other race, he would have. That's why I mentioned Paul, who is looked as an Egyptian, because that's the same mistake that Moses is also called. When Moses runs away, he meets the Midianite girls and he helps them. When they get home, their father asks them, so who helped you because you came in early today? They said, an Egyptian helped us. So even Moses was viewed as an Egyptian. This is why the mother said, the best way to hide this boy is to hide him where they want to kill him because they won't identify him.
Can I actually come in there with Moses? So Miriam and Aaron get reprimanded by God for making fun of Moses' wife, who was black.
No, the Bible says Ethiopian.
Yes.
That's the white thought to say she was black. She was they ostracized Moses for marrying a Xhosa girl.
Yeah.
And these are Zulu people.
Yes.
So it's not an issue of race.
It's right.
It's just black people arguing ukuthi wasumthatha kanjani umXhosa ukhona amaZulu
That's
la.
a bit
Yes.
personal now. Yes, that one touched me.
Yes, I wanted to touch.
That one touched me right there. Okay, that I get that. So, are we getting, basically, the conclusion of this is you saying Jesus was black,
Dark skin.
or rather, he was African.
African.
Because black is a European concept.
Yeah.
He was African.
Yeah, it's okay.
You-
I think
you know-
Umfundis wants to run in the semantics of saying dark, and he was black.
He was black, of course.
He was a Negro. Let's
Negroid.
use those derogatory terms so that you understand that if Jesus were to come and die as a race that is higher than the lowest, then he has not saved all of us.
Yes. Just save some and not all.
So he needed to come to the lowest, which is Negro. He needed to come. This is why even at his birth, he wasn't born in a better place. He was born in the worst place, so that whoever is born from there, he starts there. Salvation begins there, going up. If he started at a private hospital, thina sizalelwe ebhara akakusingowethu.
He's an elitist Jesus.
I just want to remind everyone at home, I think I've even forgotten about you. That's how hot it is. We are live, so please send through those comments, those questions, because we're going to run out of time, right? So, isn't it creating the same thing when we then are saying he's black? Are we not then othering the whites in terms of...
We're not othering whites. That's a post-modern, that's a colonial argument. Yeah. It's a colonial argument meant to insult what we affirm. You see, it's by the way, what we call the falsification of history. There's this term.
Revisionism,
yes, revisionism. We established the fact that human beings were created in Africa. I'm not talking about continent, I'm talking about the region, right? I'm using the word regionally, even though I know what we mean when we discuss Africa, as my friend has expressed here. So over the centuries, by the way, the despise of blacks is a recent thing. That's one thing you need to know. Yeah. It's a recent thing created by European colonizers. Some of them were cheap stuff in Europe. They were the underclass of Europe. Some of them, do you know, the first Europeans to go to the United States were prisoners, the riffraff, who were thrown into the Mayflower. The country hoped, their prisoners, the imprisoners, hoped that they would die in the sea. Unfortunately, they survived. America was formed by thugs.
So was Australia.
So was Australia. Yes.
Going back to say, if we then say he's black, does it mean we have to other the whites?
Yes, no.
It's just like me saying I love my wife. Does it other you?
And by the way...
So I have a wife that I love very much, and that doesn't other women. So the thought of saying he's black, others whites, that's what white people have created about race.
No, Kalokwe, he is meant to be a Jesus of us all.
Yes, and he can be us all when he's black. It's white people that are saying if he is none this, then he must be
universal.
That.
Yes.
You see, it's their thought to say if you are not male, therefore you don't think. So then you make thinking to reside in maleness. So this is what they want to push, to say, fear him being black, because when he becomes black, he will be like us. They fear themselves, not us. They fear that what would happen if black people were to treat us the way that we have treated them. And this is why black people are scared also of having a black Jesus, because they are scared that they're going to treat white people the way that they have treated us. So which makes it easier then for you to accept the position of subjugation. You have been poor for so long that when you see a white person poor, you feel sorry more for them than a black person, because you have accepted poverty for a black person. So you accept that white people must treat us the way that they've treated us. Therefore, when Jesus becomes black, you don't want white people to be treated the way that we've been treated, because colonization and coloniality has made you make white people superior. So superiority can never be treated as inferior. This is why you are scared of the idea of him being black.
Where does this leave, while I'm digesting a lot of what you've just said, where does this leave the Asiatics? Because we're seeming to be having an Africa-European thing going on, but the world is so much more than that.
Let me tell you something. Across this world, there's more blackness than whiteness. That's one thing you need to know. Because even in this whiteness, there's blackness. Black, by the way, is the presence of all color. White is the absence of color. Therefore, God had to start with blackness. Not only for anthropological, but also for scientific reasons. Because God is a super scientist. He knew what would emerge if he was created a white Adam. There would not have been a black Jesus. You get the point? Genetically. But he knew when he made an African, a dark-skinned Adam, that all humanity rested in his loins.
Look, even science agrees with you, the Mfundis. I mean, they do talk about the cradle of humankind,
Yeah.
and it's located where it's located in Africa. So to a large extent, even science, when it's not being marred by religion and other genders, does actually locate the strongest genome in the origin on the continent. Sorry, you wanted to say something there, and I cut you off.
No, it's fine. I'll say that and the other thing. But if I see you're worried about the Asians. I asked you a deliberate one. Why are you not worried about his gender? He's male. Does he not represent women?
That's a topic for another day, because I have my thoughts on that one as well.
Le-
But
le-
here's my short answer before you come here, because he had to come as something. That's
So,
my answer.
And now that he had to come as something, he lived amongst people. So if he lived, and those that are saying to us he was a boy, we don't expect him to use another low entrance. We expect him to go with the boys because he's carrying the same apparatus as the boys. So when he comes as a human being, for him to be human, he must have a race. We don't talk about his ideology, his thoughts, or whatever that he was thinking. Before we even assign thought, philosophy, religion, and all those things, we must identify him first as what gender and what race. So he walks as a black boy. Does he prejudice anyone by walking as a black boy or a white boy? No, until he starts to utter words, until he starts telling us what is philosophy. You believe he's all for us. But the Samaritan woman did not believe that. And when they spoke, he himself, he says, salvation is for the Jews first, and then you. So the idea of separatism, meaning less and more, and superior and inferior, is a white thought. So this is why everything that is different from you must be either made superior or inferior.
Yes.
So if I think differently from you as a church, you must define me in those two categories. Does this mean this is a superior thought or an inferior thought? If it's an inferior thought, let's squash it. If it's a superior thought, let's praise it. Even if I was right to tell you that this is not, but because you defined me in those two lines, inferior and superior, this is why we then say Jesus is universal. What does universal mean? Does it mean you woke up one day black, the next day Chinese, the other day Indian, the next day white? Remember, the cultures of the day would have actually crucified him for being that. To say, what kind of a human are you that is always changing? They would have killed him for that. So it's we as there is a poem that is actually loved by Utatu Mandela. It was written by someone else. I've forgotten the fear. Yeah, Miriam Matria. Yes. That we are not scared of our inferiority. It's our greatness, because greatness is a huge responsibility. Black people are afraid to say God, being Christ, is them, because of our irresponsibility. So we rather assign him another race, so that salvation does not become squarely on our shoulders. So we fear that greatness. This is why we want to say, besides us. Because now that the salvation of men hinges on our shoulders, what are you doing about it during the day?
Yo, Mfundis. Yeah. It's going level. I can even see now.
Going to end high in the sky and deep in the soil.
So because what it's done now, it's taken it away from the white man's agenda, and it's brought it to the black man, as in black person's agenda. So, I mean, what you're saying is so powerful. I just would like for us to sit there. It may have started off as a white man's agenda in terms of the power dynamics and how they want to position themselves. But we've now owned it because we want to run away from the responsibility of a black Jesus. Yeah. That's what you're saying.
Yes.
What we need now to validate this proposition is for us to write literature positively towards white people and evangelize them without asking for permission. We tell them, you are sinners, and here are your sins. I'm being honest with you. Instead of fighting them in the streets, fighting them in parliament, you won't change them. Because you are operating from, I'm inferior, as if I'm removing, as if no. Whites go to text to prove things, demonstrate, that's right. That's right, not against them, but against the ideology.
But don't we need to start with us blacks believing that Jesus is black and therefore because I mean we've abdicated our position and therefore our responsibility, and so we can't go to them and try and show them something that we either half-heartedly believe or we're not united in believing it.
Let me tell you what we need to do. Two things. One of the major distinctions between black people and white people, Africans, is that whites institutionalize ideas because they are after controlling epistemology and industry, politics, and everything. Blacks don't discuss things, but they don't institutionalize them. You see, this talk will end here. We need to establish a program now that will articulate who we are and send it to those who thought we were nothing. If we have to talk of counter anthropological literature, we need to go that way. And whites must start telling their kids, don't read that. Because we are not going to be begging them, we are going to be affirming who we are. It will also mean studying what they write in order to pour holes into it and not to embrace it. Jesus is not going to come back until those who claim to have the truth have told the world the truth. I'm being honest with you.
It's literature is because you need to control literature so that this is why now when you're studying maths, you still need to know about Pythagoras. But the story is not complete because you're knowing about Pythagoras. Pythagoras did not wake up one day and started imagining right angles. They won't tell you that Pythagoras was actually a student of Egypt.
Yes.
So why do you deliberately hide that to say, this is why now when Paul, you talked about us going back to evangelize them, it's what Paul has already done. This is why when the Bible is being introduced, it says, I am Paul, an apostle to the Gentiles. And when he leaves Israel, he does not leave Israel and goes to Africa. He leaves Israel and he goes to Europe. And then he begins to set up churches in Europe and say, this is a church in Corinth, this is a church. And this is why your New Testament, that is Paul, it's not a New Testament that is a representation of the apostles. It's a New Testament that is Paulinian. Because white people can confirm in their localities that this is the point. When you say Athens, they will tell you this is the Athens. When Paul says, I was standing at this river, they will tell you that this is the river where Paul was. So now, the black man that went to Europe to go and evangelize them, after he was done, what was now difficult for colonial thought was for them to bring back the story to Africa and say, here is a story of your forefathers. Because remember, when you are conquering a people, you need to conquer their gods also. That's why in Babylon, when they enter Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar says, bring me the intelligent ones. I want the ones that have the idea of catching on to science. Teach them the ways of the Chaldeans so that even if when they go back to Jerusalem, what is common sense to them is being Babylonian than being Hebrew.
I've just had an aha moment as you were talking, and I don't want to lose this line of thought.
Yeah.
The New Testament, all those Pauline books, there's none that is to a church that needed to be evangelized in Africa.
No, not at all.
Not at all.
Not at all.
Not at all. So when you then say the Bible is the New Testament, and then you think you've completed the whole story. No, that's the story according to Paul. The rest, and remember that Paul was not even part of the 12 that walked with him. Paul had a Damascus experience. Peter had a lived experience. The rest of the guys had a lived experience with Jesus. Paul just had a Damascus one. But the rest of the guys that were in Jerusalem after AD 70, when people were being chased away, the last writer, who is Josephus about the story, he says those that had been left in Jerusalem went into Africa.
Yeah.
So if you want the rest of the story, don't go to Europe. Come to us.
But also, I'm thinking also because Paul is, as you said, he's the apostle to the Gentiles, right? And the Gentiles were up there.
And they were not
They were not
Jews.
yes, they
No,
were
they-
non-Jews. They were up there, and then
Yes.
the disciples were disciples to the Jews.
No,
Who?
to the Gentiles.
No, I'm saying Paul was sent to the Gentiles.
Okay, fine.
Right? Paul was sent to the Gentiles because that's what then they start fighting about is
I
that
see.
spreading it to the Gentiles. But bringing it down to Africa, for example, Mark is quoted as the first one to be sent to Egypt. There's no fight
Yes.
about him going to, and it's not termed he's gone to the Gentiles when he goes to Egypt, right? But the rest of the books of Paul, who was a disciple to the Gentiles, are all the European letters that he
Yes.
wrote out there. Yeah, okay.
You see, what then whites have made to disappear is the reason why Paul went to the Gentiles. Because they thought everybody was a Gentile, including them. You get the point? Why did Paul take a different route? Because this, what we would call the southern part of that evangelistic territory, did not need the gospel.
Because yes, evangeli dingwa khona
Dingwa le,
where
yeah.
Paul went.
That's
And
right.
that's what just hit me now. Please join us. In the last few minutes that we have, please join us because I think this is just such a fascinating talk. Because, okay, so I'm sold. Ne? Shem, I'm gonna claim my black Jesus. Thank you very much. But now what? Because we don't also want to then to go to the extreme and create what the whites did when they claimed Jesus, isn't it? We want to position him properly because we want to position him to the world.
One, we want to crucify the white Jesus.
Yeah.
The white
We want to
Jesus,
start
not
with
the
the
white
crucifixion.
Symbolism, ne?
We want to crucify the European Jesus.
Okay.
That's the beginning of evangelizing whites. We must remove them from trusting a false Jesus. The Bible says in the last days there will be false Christ. That white Jesus is the first false Christ. 2. You need to understand that when Paul moves to the what we call the Eritrean region, the Near East, all those 7 churches, those territories, there was no question of their black. Racism comes after. Do you know that there was once an emperor who ruled North Africa and all the Mediterranean lands beyond the Mediterranean Sea? Because the issue of race did not really bother people much. It is whites who created theories around racism. All people needed was what you believe. I don't believe what you believe. There are no racial debates in the Bible to the extent to which we have engaged them in the last 300 years.
I just want to read this comment before we continue. So TT Combustible says, God is a super scientist. Blackness is the presence of all colors.
Yes.
Whiteness is the absence of all colors. He's like, wow. And then Langelihle Dube says, evangelize them and correct their ideology. That's what we need to do. I think one of the other things that marries what you're saying is the fact that the Jews were amongst the other nations, were the only ones that had one God.
Yes.
Right? And the Africans are known also to have one God.
One God, yes.
Right? So again, I'm having these connect the dot moments as we're talking. Sorry.
You haven't asked me anything. Ask me.
No,
a question.
okay, no, I
Yeah.
thought you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I need to also say to you, the reason why Simon of Cyrene had to carry the cross was that this was his brother. Nothing about the crucifixion is about whites. It's about the murder of white people, of black people. There's even a legend that one of the guy who said, remember me when you get to paradise, was one of those thugs that had confronted Joseph and Mary as they were running with Jesus to Egypt. But it's part of I suspect, a legendary story. But there are scholars who argue that that man who spoke to Jesus on the cross had met him earlier in his youth and was a dark-skinned human being.
Dumiso, let me ask you this.
Okay, maybe before you ask. I'm very much suspicious when white people tell you that this person is black. From your reading of the Bible, how many black people do you know in the Bible? Simon of Cyrene,
The Ethiopian eunuch,
the Ethiopian eunuch. Who else?
Moses' wife.
Moses' wife. Who else?
You're putting me on the spot.
The
but
Queen of
The
Sheba.
Queen of Sheba, yes.
Yes. Okay, there is the boy Ahithophel, the one that runs with the...
With the clothes, with
Yes.
the throat, with the
one that runs with the message to David, which
David,
has no
yes.
message but is just running.
Okay.
Look at the characters that they're giving you. The Ethiopian eunuch is a guy who is believed to have not have faith because he's coming from Ethiopia. The Queen of Sheba comes to us, the whites, to learn of wisdom because the wise one was wise white Solomon. Moses' wife is not accepted because he is Ethiopian, he is black. Simon of Cyrene carries the cross because he's black. So what that does is psychologically, when as a black person, you are a slave. This is why Simon of Cyrene must be carrying the cross. They would not tell you about the rest of the black people. If Simon of Cyrene was black, how come you're not accepting that the other gentleman that makes the 4 guys that were friends to Paul? You remember the 4 guys that start the church with Paul? One of them is Cyrenian. Why don't they tell you that that guy is black? So they cherry pick black people for you. Tokenism. Then they say, this one is black. And then when you look at the character, the same way that they say, Denzel Washington wins a Grammy, but we're going to give him for being the greatest American gangster. Is that the best movie that Denzel has ever done? So it says for a black person to be named by white people, he must be representing something that one people want you to believe about yourself. So they would not hang on the wall there and say, Solomon, the wisest, who wrote 1,000 proverbs. In as much as the Song of Lovers, Songs of Solomon says, my lover has dreadlocks. They are as dark as the tents of Kedar. They will still say he was white. Why? Because the greatest man that wrote the most proverbs cannot be black. So this is why you even so when you get to Jesus, it becomes too dangerous because Jesus is God.
So when did the Jews, because when we talk about Jews nowadays,
Yeah.
you do think white person, right? They may just be more olive in color, but you think white person. When did the Jews become white?
Even to use olive in color, a ripe olive is black. So when people are telling you that Jews are olives, a ripe olive is black. It's not that color. When it's ripe, it's black. So when they are saying they are olivine, they are right. They are black because a ripe olivine is black. So nature does not allow a vacuum. When Paul was evangelizing, these guys, they pick up a story and they say there is a promise here. But the one who's supposed to claim the promise no longer knows about the promise. So they pick up that story and they say, what if we call ourselves Jews? Just like he was saying last week. I think it's last week or the week before. When you asked him, so who becomes a Jew? It was about declaration.
Yeah.
I declare that I am a Jew. Do you have the bloodline? No, but I just declared that I am a Jew. Because the one that is supposed to be carrying the promise no longer knows. Remember the story of Esau and Jacob? I am worried when a Christian says, does it matter to discuss these issues? That was the time where Esau was asked the same question. Does it matter that you are the firstborn? And they said, what is it to me when I am about to die? What is it to a black person? What is it that Christ is black or white? So at that moment, when he was supposed to turn his life to say, does it matter that you are the firstborn, hungry or not? Jacob was holding a bowl and says, my guy, there is something that you hold, but I see that you don't know its value. Trade it to me. And the black person says, does it matter? Remember the last time when he was brought to the council says, it is expedient that one man dies than the whole nation perish. So it's expedient as black people that we let him go. Let Jesus be any other race than for all of us to suffer his death. Remember, when we then identify with him, his story becomes ours now. So we took our birthright and we made it a non-issue. And someone else picked it up. And when they picked it up, they started claiming the promises that they are there. Now they occupy Palestine under that promise. They are saying, according to the Bible says, this is our homeland. So this is why now you need to defend them as the nations of the world. Why? Because the prophet says, he who protects Israel, God would look at them with favor.
Yeah. So there's a comment, I'll come to him from this. Joshua Chitsika, thanks Josh, says we need to start institution of writing about the black Jesus. And he says on national TV, he's going to fund it. Noted. We have just under 10 minutes.
I would like to confirm something before we summarize.
Yes.
Flavius Josephus, the Jewish scholar, who was captured during the 70 AD destruction of Jerusalem by Romans, was then asked by the Roman authorities to write a history of the Jews. He lived contemporaneously with Jesus Christ. He says in his text, Jesus was a tall, well-built man with a dark hue. This is a witness account of the complexion of Jesus.
We need to start wrapping up. So, I've got so many thoughts in my mind. We need to find a way to move forward, right? And we need to find a way to get this message out to, firstly, black people so that they start owning it. But in a way, how do we deal with the inherent fear? And we spoke about this fear last week as well. There's a fear that's been so deeply ingrained in us as black people of standing up and protecting our blackness, that we are going to be the first ones to pull ourselves back from moving forward in this. So how do we deal with that? How do we overcome that? How do we make the African who's scared to really be truly African comfortable in their Africanness as a starting point?
I want to make a radical point before it gives an explanatory concept. It's time up. Late in the afternoon. Those who will hear us. If black people don't want to understand this biblically valid message, they'll be lost with those whites who think blackness is an evil. All we need to do is to humbly tell our people where we come from and who we are, and leave the rest to them. We can't force them to adopt a new epistemology when the epistemology comes from London. We can't force them. But those who can, you'll be surprised at how God will save us and increase his tribe on earth the moment we start telling epistemic truths about who we are.
The fear is what. Remember when Jesus also was coming into the scene, he knew that he was going to breathe something that would be termed new. And he would tell stories and says, be careful that you do not pour new wine into old wineskins.
Yes.
Lest you lose both the wine and the wine skin. Malcolm X says the same thing. Before you introduce someone into light that has been forever in the darkness, light can actually injure their eyes. During the week, my nephew says to his dad, why can't I change? Why isn't the remote working? So he's busy playing with the remote. He's saying, why isn't the remote working? His father, my brother, says, you need to switch on the television first before you can start changing channels. So the black child needs to be switched on first before you can start changing things that he believes. So in the process of switching on, you are likely to damage a lot that have been accustomed to darkness. In science, it's termed accommodation when the eye is adjusting itself to light. When it has been accustomed to darkness, it would accommodate the light and finally accept that the light is here to save, not to destroy. So we, like he's saying, it's the hour is late. Because when you are preaching and saying the second coming is nigh, we are preaching this when the second coming is nigh. Mm-hmm. When we fail to do this with men, how will we contend with horses on the banks of Jordan? And now we are at the banks of Jordan. This is where we are. Time is closing. So it's either you get on or you get ridden down by horses. So when it's going to be a difficult time for black people because we, like you're saying, we need to write. We need to own a lot of responsibility. We need to recheck our history. Where did we go wrong? What happened? And all these things are waiting on us as black people to own up, to come to this. The story of the Bible is a story of people, when they do not own up to who they are, they suffer. Yeah. Black people don't want to acknowledge that our suffering is ours. The covenant was with us. When God says, I will punish fathers for 4 generations, you don't read it that way. You think he said 4 minutes. He said 4 generations. When you allow a bastard into the house of worship, for those people, unto 10 generations, they will suffer. And when the God that you are dealing with is a Santa Claus. The one that says, I reward children that do good. The ones that do bad, I'll put them in a naughty corner. This one says, your children will be born and they will suffer for the sins of their fathers. And black people don't want to confront that God. To say, we are the generation. This is why now Daniel, after 70 years, when people had relaxed in Babylon, he is the only one in the Bible who is made to have been conscious to say, 70 years are over. This is not home. I like a sermon by Pastor Maponga that says, saints in the wrong places. When Esther and Haman are left in Babylon, when they were supposed to be building walls, they were left because Babylon was too comfortable. But Daniel is saying, God, you said, after 70 years, we must go back. So we are a generation that are living at that time to say, the time that you said that the generations must suffer for the sins of the fathers. Remember, as a colonialist, this is what I taught you. Sons can never be punished for the sins of their fathers. You know that verse in Ezekiel, right? You know it. That we are taught that our situation that we are in now is our doing. It has never been our father's doing. But the Bible says the sons will suffer for a covenant that was made when they were not there. Colonization is a covenant that was made between an African king, whether by hook or by crook. They crooked him, but a signature, whatever, whether it was an X or whether it was a crucifix or whether he said you can have that land, it's what has landed us into this. This is why now when you were speaking about the land last week, they tell you about an agreement that was made in 1903. Were you there? Yet that covenant that was made, that land act that was made then and it's affecting you now. So if the sons in the 4th generation do not reverse the covenant of the 4th generations before them, they will continue suffering. So this is the God that we don't want as Africans. We want a God of charity. We want a God who does not chastise. We want a God who will not punish us or punish our children for our sins. God is not interested in you. He's interested in your loins. This is why when he says to Abraham, the promise, you will not see it. But the promise will be nations. Way ahead of you. You might not even see it when, but it's here. I'm promising you now. But this is what you must know. If they mess up this covenant that I'm having with you now, they shall suffer. So anyone who wants to be called Jewish or Hebrew or what, they must know that they are claiming a promise of suffering. Before you get to Canaan, you must know that there is a 400 years of
Wilderness.
slavery.
Yo, Mfundis, I'm going to give you the last word because we've gone, before my bosses fire me, we've gone over
Yes.
time. What are your last words on this? To someone who's sitting at home, who started off thinking, does it matter? And now we've given them a whole mouthful to chew on. Last words from your side.
I think we are now moving from Egypt to Canaan. Some will remain in the wilderness and die there. We need the Joshuas now who will say, give me that mountain. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for joining us as well. You're definitely going to come back. I think it's just become very clear that you're going to come back because there's so much you can still get from you. And for you sitting at home, I think if nothing else, I hope this conversation has challenged you. If you are running away from this topic, you need to ask yourself, why are you running away from this topic? What is it about this topic that's making you uneasy, uncomfortable? And maybe it's time for us Black people to stop playing victim, right? And start owning our role in this whole situation. So we appreciate you joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week. And a reminder again that we are winding down. We've got a few more sessions left before we go on our break. So if you do have any topics that you want us to sneak in this last couple of weeks, do so. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. Be blessed.
Wangithanda ngiyabonga. Uthando olungaka olwangimangaza. Uthando olungaka olwangisindisa. Ngiyabonga. Ngiyabonga thando lwakho, nceba zakho, kuba wena wawungekho, kabe safela endleleni. Ngiyabonga, ngiyabonga, ngiyabonga. Bano njengawe, banofana nawe. Ngiyabonga, ngiyabonga, ngiyabonga.